My foolish brother played a dangerous prank on my girlfriend by replacing her narcolepsy medication with fake placebo pills. As a result, she fell asleep while driving, crashed, and ended up in the hospital. Despite this, my parents took his side. About 2 years ago, during a family gathering, my brother made a cruel joke about my girlfriend's narcolepsy, which she rightfully called him out on. Offended by her response, he decided to get back at her by swapping her medication with placebos. The very next day, my girlfriend got behind the wheel, unaware that she had taken fake medication. Inevitably, she dozed off while driving. Fortunately, no one else was on the road, but she crashed into a guardrail at around 40 mph. She was rushed to the hospital, and that's when I received the call informing me about the accident. The police told me she was facing jail time for reckless driving, and soon after, my brother called me, saying he felt guilty and wanted to apologize. I had no idea what he was talking about, so I pressed him for details. After some hesitation, he finally admitted to switching her medication. I was furious. My girlfriend was fighting for her life and possibly facing prison time, all because my brother couldn't handle being rightfully called out. I immediately started thinking of ways to prove her innocence. I reached out to everyone who had attended the family gathering to see if anyone had noticed anything suspicious. Fortunately, one person recalled seeing my brother Jack messing with my girlfriend's medication, though they hadn't witnessed the actual swap. This was potentially credible evidence. While my girlfriend was still in the hospital, I took her medication and had it tested. The results confirmed that the pills were just sugar pills, not her prescribed narcolepsy medication. When my girlfriend finally woke up, I told Jessica everything, and saying she was traumatized would be an understatement. Fortunately, she avoided jail time, but incredibly, so did my brother. After the legal dispute was settled, I was torn between disbelief and rage. My brother's off-color jokes had always been a part of who he was, but sabotaging Jessica's medication, that was a level of malice I never imagined he was capable of. I wanted to believe it was some twisted joke or a mistake, but the truth was staring me in the face, undeniable. I remember the moment when everything fell into place. It was late at night, and I was sitting in the living room with Jess. She was still shaken from the accident. The bruises on her arms were fading, but the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. We talked about how she could have fallen asleep, despite taking her medication as prescribed, and I could see the terror in her eyes. She was afraid she could no longer trust her own body. Even then, I didn't want to believe my brother had done this to her, but there was no escaping the truth. He was angry that she had called him out in front of everyone, so he decided to teach her a lesson that nearly cost her her life. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every memory I had of Jack, our childhood together, the stupid pranks we played on each other, the arguments that always ended in laughter. But now, all I could think about was how he had nearly killed the woman I love, all because he couldn't handle being called out for his behavior. The next day, I knew I had to confront him. I couldn't let this go. I needed to hear from his own mouth why he did it, and if he even grasped the severity of what he had done. He accused me of being selfish for cutting him off over what he called one mistake and tried to convince me that I was overreacting. But I couldn't keep him in my life after this. I turned and walked out of his apartment, slamming the door behind me. I didn't trust myself to stay in that room for another second without doing something I'd regret. As I drove home, my mind was racing. When I got back to our place, Jess was waiting for me, her eyes red from crying. I sat down next to her and told her what I had just done. She didn't say much, just nodded and stared at the floor. I could see how deeply this hurt her, how betrayed she felt. It wasn't just that Jack had tampered with her meds, it was the fact that someone she trusted, someone who was supposed to be family, had done this to her. That night we decided we needed to step back from everything, from Jack, from my family, and from all the drama. We needed time to process what had happened and figure out how to move forward. We agreed to cut contact with Jack completely. There was no way we could have him in our lives after what he'd done. In the end, Jess and I decided we couldn't stay in that toxic environment any longer. We packed our bags and moved to a different city a few hours away. We needed distance from the memories and drama, and we wanted to build a new life together. It wasn't an easy decision, but we knew it was the right one. The first few months were tough. Jess was still dealing with the physical and emotional trauma from the accident, and I was struggling to accept that my own family had turned against us. We leaned on each other a lot during that time, finding comfort in the fact that, no matter what, we had each other. Eventually, Jess started seeing a therapist to help her work through the trauma. It was a slow process, but I could see her getting stronger every day. She was learning to trust herself again, and I was learning how to support her without trying to fix everything. During those months, I didn't hear from Jack, not a single call, text, or email. Honestly, that was fine by me. After everything that had happened, the silence was a relief. It gave me the space I needed to focus on Jess and our future, free from the constant reminder of my brother. I thought maybe Jack had finally understood that what he'd done was unforgivable and that there was no coming back from it. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call from him. I was at work in the middle of a meeting when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I looked down at the screen, and my heart skipped a beat when I saw Jack's name. For a moment, I just stared at it, frozen. I hadn't expected to hear from him, especially not after all this time. The last thing I wanted was to deal with this in the middle of the day, so I let it go to voicemail. I had done everything I could to shut that chapter of my life and put it behind me, but there he was, trying to claw his way back in. When the meeting finally ended, I slipped into an empty conference room and pulled out my phone. There were 3 missed calls from Jack and a voicemail waiting for me. My hand hovered over the play button, hesitating. I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear his voice again, or if I could handle whatever excuse or apology he was about to offer. But curiosity got the better of me, and I pressed play. He sounded desperate, saying he was sorry and wanted to explain. But the more messages he left, the more I felt the walls I'd built around myself starting to crack. Jess and I felt like we were healing, and being in a new city meant we didn't have to worry about Jack messing up our new lives. In the end, I let the calls go unanswered, and the voicemails piled up in my inbox. It was the hardest decision I'd ever made, but it was the only one I could make. I could live with my decision, so I silenced my phone and got back to work. Life moved on, and so did I. As the days passed, the calls from Jack slowly stopped. My parents, however, were relentless. They kept calling, leaving messages about how I was tearing the family apart and needed to come to my senses and make amends with Jack. In the end, I had to make a difficult choice. I blocked their numbers and cut off all contact. It hurt like hell, but I knew it was the only way Jess and I could move forward. We needed to focus on ourselves and our healing without the constant pressure from my family. Slowly but surely, things started to improve. Jess was making progress in therapy, and we were adjusting to our new life in the city. We found a nice apartment and made some new friends. We talked a lot during those days, making a promise to each other that we would always be honest and communicate, no matter how hard it was. That promise became the foundation of our relationship, the thing that kept us strong, even when everything else felt like it was falling apart. Of course, there were times when I missed my family. Holidays were especially hard, knowing that everyone was together while Jess and I were alone, but I knew that going back wasn't an option. A year passed, then 2, and slowly the pain began to fade. Jess and I found our rhythm. We travelled, explored new places, and made new memories. With every new experience, the past felt a little further away. But just when I thought we were finally in the clear, something happened that brought it all rushing back. It was a cold day in December when I got a letter in the mail from my parents. I almost didn't open it. Part of me didn't want to know what they had to say. But curiosity got the better of me. The letter was long, filled with apologies and explanations, but the gist was this: they wanted to see us, talk things out, and try to rebuild our relationship. At first, I didn't know what to think. I wanted to believe they were sincere, that they had finally come around and understood why we'd had to leave, but another part of me was skeptical. Was this just another attempt to sweep everything under the rug and pretend nothing had happened? Jess and I talked about it for a long time. She was supportive as always, telling me that whatever I decided, she'd be there with me. In the end, I decided to give it a shot. I wasn't sure if I could ever truly forgive them, but I was willing to hear them out. We arranged to meet at a small cafe in the city where Jess and I had made our home. I was nervous as hell, my heart pounding as I walked through the door. But when I saw my parents sitting there, looking older and more worn than I remembered, some of that anger melted away. The conversation was awkward at first, but my parents apologized for not supporting us and for not understanding how serious the situation was. They admitted they had been wrong to side with Jack initially. It wasn't everything I needed to hear, but it was a start. And in that moment I realized I didn't need their approval or understanding to move forward. Jess and I had built a life together, a strong, beautiful life, and that was enough. But if my parents were willing to be a part of that life, then maybe we could find a way to move forward together. As we left the cafe that day, I felt lighter, like a weight I didn't even know I was carrying had been lifted off my shoulders. Jack never reached out again, and I'm okay with that. I didn't need another apology from him, and I didn't need him in my life.